Promotional consideration paid for by the following.
Gone are the days of wrestling with our favorite LJN wrestling figures, trying to convince them to stand up. What's a guy to do? I'll tell you what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to get on Etsy and look up 4 Left 3D Creations and get yourself these amazing custom LJN figure stands. There is a custom stand available for every single one of your LJN wrestling superstar figures. Make your display shine by grabbing these custom LJN stands from 4 Left 3D Creations today.
Hello, everybody. It's Jason Snopes, New Age Revolutionist, The Cave, and it is a Friday. That's right, TGI to the F. Happy Friday. And here on the big show, check your program lineups. It is my 30 most memorable wrestling moments. Here we go. You know the deal. I talk about the standout moments from probably the most important part of my childhood, the ranks of professional wrestling. So far, we've talked about, well, we've done what? 5. This is my sixth most memorable wrestling moment. And I hope my pal Howie is watching because he's also a part of this one. And this one has absolutely nothing to do with the stuff that you see on TV. In fact, it has nothing to do with action figures. I'm reminiscing now, folks, about my time as a professional wrestler. That's right. My 6th most memorable wrestling moment was my time as a professional wrestler. Now, are you saying, what are you talking about? Were you an indie wrestler? Did you get hooked up with Brian Hardy? Did you do some backyard stuff? What'd you do? No, I did some housework, some house shows. I did a lot of house shows. What do I mean by house shows? Well, I wrestled when I was 10 in my house. Yeah, and I was a professional wrestler in my house wrestling with stuffed animals. Yeah, it's true. So the number 6 most memorable wrestling moment is my experiences as a professional wrestler, playing wrestling, of course, in the house, not with the figures, but with myself. I had a gigantic black and white stuffed panda bear. It wasn't mine, it was my sister's. And it was big. And it was the size of those, when you see these idiots walking around the carnivals and they won the big stuffed animal, you know, and they got to carry it around on their shoulder the entire time. That's the size that I'm talking about. And I'm pretty sure it was stuffed with, styrofoam beanbag type of filler. So it was real soft and it made a great sound when you landed on it. It sounded like a beanbag chair. And it had arms. You can't see me, but it had arms that stuck out, like that, like a teddy bear. And it had legs that stuck out. It was in a sitting position for the most part, but it was so big that it was not a small stuffed animal. And that was my opponent. In fact, that was the only opponent that I ever had. We went around the horn, folks. We toured territory to territory, having the same match over and over again. I have no memory of what I called him, but I definitely had a name for him. Now, I didn't always stick with that name because I would wrestle real characters and use their name, so I would wrestle Big John Studd or I would wrestle Ric Flair or whatever. I do, however, remember my name. And folks, my name is and forever will be Manhammer. That's right, Manhammer. And where did I first come up with that name? I have no idea, but the first time that name was even uttered was back in like 1985, 1986, let's say 86. I'm getting the wrestling magazines, and inside the wrestling magazines was this amazing game that I thought was incredible at the time. It was the greatest idea in the history of life. It was a fantasy wrestling league. I didn't know what fantasy wrestling was back then. I didn't know what fantasy anything was back then, fantasy sports of any kind. But it was a fantasy wrestling league that you could fill out. You would name your character. you would put your name as the manager. And I was, oh, I know. Oh, wow. I have not heard about that name I have not thought about that name in forever. Folks, a new door has been kicked open in the world of insanity. My wrestler's name was Manhammer. So you fill out the order form, you put your wrestler's name in, you put his weight, and then you pick 10 moves from a list of like 50 moves. And then you send in $5 or something, and I assume that you would just be put into some kind of weird fantasy thing. Maybe it was just I don't know what it was. Maybe it was a gimmick. I don't know. Maybe they just drew names out of a hat. But if they actually ran it like a Dungeons and Dragons or some kind of dice style board game, it would have been awesome. But I never actually mailed it in. So you pick the 10, you pick the 10 moves, and you send it in. My wrestler's name was Manhammer. My manager, I was the manager, but I was not me. I came up with the name Crafty Carl Crafton. And I have not thought of that name in 30 years. Crafty, 30 years plus. I'd have been 18. 35 years. Crafty Carl Crafton was the manager that I came up with. And Manhammer was the character name. So Manhammer has been in existence since I was about 11. Incredible. Now, the hook for this game, I'm getting off track, but the hook for this game was if you did well enough, you would win an actual championship belt of some kind. I don't know anybody who's ever gotten it, whatever. That's not the point. Manhammer was my character name. And, oh man, this was before I lived with my grandparents. And after we moved out of Chile, after the divorce, we lived in apartments. And then my mom would always rent a house, which was always just like an upgraded apartment. So one of the houses that we rented, I don't know, it had an enclosed porch. I think you call it mud room. I think you call it a sunroom, whatever you call it. But it was an enclosed porch on the front of the house. And it was a perfect, like, square sort of rectangle shape. And it had, a couple of chairs out there. But that was my arena. And I would wrestle this bear I'm not going to say hours. I'm not going to over dramatize and say hours, but 45, 50 minutes to an hour, I would be out there in that porch, wrestling this bear. And since I was such a wrestling fan, a scholar, a student of the game, when I was wrestling this bear, it wasn't just punch kick, folks. I was doing moves. I had finishing moves. I had the Manhammer's finishing move was called the hammer drop. And it was a full Nelson, and then I dropped forward. And I thought that was the most crippling move in the history of life. Because it's almost like a pedigree. I think like the Miz does it or did it now or whatever. Now I see it a lot. But when I first saw it, I was like, that's the hammer drop. So I would do that. That was my finishing move. I would jump off the chair. But I would also get my butt kicked. This teddy bear, this panda bear, was a beast. And the panda bear would beat me up and throw punches, and I would be down, and I would sell, and I'd be sweating my butt off out there because I'd play in the summertime where I was sweating all over the place. And this bear would win occasionally. And I had probably the best time ever playing with this stuffed bear. Now, if you're a wrestler, you need a prize, you need a trophy. And this is before the days of the WWF foam belts that are up there. Those came out. They might have been out, but your mom's not giving you $16.99 to order from the WWF catalog. You're not. There weren't replica belts back then like there are now. The Wrestling Ring, the toy company that made all that sold the figures that you'd find in the magazines, they came up with a generic world title foam strap, I think. But again, your mom's not writing a check. If it's not at Kmart, you're not getting it. The AWA belt existed, the AWA toy belt. But I got the AWA toy belt in 85. By 86, 87, that thing is gone. It's destroyed. It's gone. So what I had to do was I had to make my own belts. I had to make and they were made out of poster board. So I would go get poster board from the grocery store and I would make a belt. Now I was foolish and I didn't realize that the plates sat on leather that was already cut out, right? So I would make a big, well, I tried very, very hard to draw the big gold. I tried very, very hard to draw the Hogan 85 belt. And you just can't, I could not get everything to line up even. I was a terrible artist. But so I would always do Ric Flair's domed globe, a very easy, you can't see it, but it's behind me. The domed globe. I would always try to draw that perfectly. Or I would just do a round belt. But I always tried so hard. And then you have to draw the inside of the belt. So you have to write World Heavyweight Wrestling and then Champion down here. There's always a globe in the middle I would draw. Then you had to have your side plates. And I would always draw, NBC, CBS, ABC, like the television title. And so I'd get black poster board and probably white or yellow. I don't know. But what I would do is I would cut out the plate and then I would cut out just long rectangle straps and I would tape the straps on the back of the plate. So it wasn't in the style of a real belt, but it was my belt. And I made them all the time. I loved them. I would fold them up like Ric Flair and just hold them and do interviews. I would cut promos in front of the bathroom mirror. The night that I lost my title, I got color. If you know what I mean, folks. I was wrestling the Bear. And somehow I either pulled a hangnail or something. I did something and my finger was bleeding. And so I went into my bathroom and I squeezed as much blood out of my finger that I could get. And I just put it all over my head. And then I came back to the match and the Bear used an international object, of course, and busted me up. And then I cut a promo bleeding in the mirror with, at this point, dried and just wiped off. I mean, it looked silly. Bleeding in the mirror. When I come back, you're mine. Best times ever. By myself in the front room. Now, I preferred to wrestle by myself. But my best pal Howie and I, we did have a short-lived reign as World Tag Team Champions. I believe it's the IWA. The IWA World Tag Team Champions. Now, that would mean I went over his house and we played in his living room, which was a nice rectangle, couch and love seat up against the wall like your parents did back then. So we had instant ropes. We had instant, things to smash your head into. And Howie had a couple of smaller bears. They weren't as big as my bear. They were smaller. And I was Manhammer and he was Horrible Howie. And we would team up to beat these bears. Well, we had to have belts. Now, Howie's an artist. Howie's a much better artist than I am. And so he made us championship belts. And when I went over there for the night, whether it was a sleepover or it was just a play date where we wrestled, the belts were on his living room floor laid out. And it was like nothing I had ever seen before because it actually looked like a belt. It wasn't just two pieces of black paper strapped to a centerpiece, taped to a centerpiece. He had cut out the entire leather backing out of paper, of course, and then put the plates in. I didn't realize that that's how the belts were made. So, but here's the best part, folks. We've talked about how the Collectors Entertainment Network, a channel that you must go see on YouTube, Collectors Entertainment Network, he has so many original items from his childhood, including this notebook that captures every LJN, storyline, where he bought the figures, what year he got the figure. And these are written back then. He wrote it back then. It's just this journal of LJNs that he still has. Well, I've always envied people who lived in their childhood home their whole lives, or their parents were decent parents and saved all of their stuff. Mom. Howie was in a situation where he lived in his parents' home and, until he went to college, grew up in one house. I kid you not, 2 weeks ago, we were communicating again, and he said, I found those belts, and he sent me a picture of them, and here they are. Look at those belts. When he sent me those, it was a very emotional moment. It was very emotional. I almost want to print out that picture and put it in a frame and hang it up down here, just because it's such a ridiculous piece of nostalgia. It's just such a ridiculous item to still have, and I just love it. So then I had a little sister. My youngest sister. She's born in 81. So what is that? 5 years younger than me. I'm a little older at this time. I'm maybe 13. Her and I are a tag team together. We're Demolition. We liked Demolition. So me and my, 7-year-old sister would wrestle the bear. We'd wrestle the bear, and we would do the Demolition, drop, whatever that move is, their finishing move. When my half brother and sister were born, again, I'm around 12, 13. I would wrestle the babies when they were maybe 1, 2. I'd wrestle them. I wouldn't kill them or anything. I mean, I would. I'm not going to hold back. I mean, mercies for the weak. I did pummel them, but gently. So I would wrestle them, but nothing compared to that time in that rented house when I would wrestle this giant panda bear and had a great time, had a blast. So wrestling memory number 6, the time that I was a professional wrestler. We'll be back tomorrow. Tomorrow's Saturday on the big show. I think it's 30 favorite TV moments. And then Sunday is the Power Hour. Lots of questions flowing in, including a very serious question that doesn't even have anything to do with me. It has to do with the person who wrote it. So I'm going to message him tonight and make sure that he wants me to address that, and I will. So tune in, folks. We'll see you tomorrow on the big show. Good night now.